The grand hall shimmered with wealth and pride, but Damien Cross stood frozen. His breath caught in his throat as though the air itself had betrayed him. For years, he had commanded every room he walked into, every deal, every conversation bending to his will. Tonight, however, his authority collapsed in an instant. Because across the polished floor, walking in with quiet power and radiant grace, was the woman he once cast aside. She moved as though she had been born for this moment, confident, untouchable, her head held high. Her hand rested gently in the grasp of another man. He wasn't just any man. Ethan was admired for his success but loved for his kindness. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. His presence filled the space, not with arrogance, but with quiet strength. And between them, clutching their hands with playful innocence, were two children. Twins. Their smiles lit the room, their laughter rising above the hum of chatter. But it was their eyes that struck Damien like a knife, because those eyes, those unmistakable eyes, mirrored his own. His chest tightened, his knuckles whitened around the glass in his hand. He could feel his carefully built walls shatter. He thought she would never return. He thought she would remain hidden, forgotten, a shadow from a past he had buried. Yet here she was, alive with beauty, carrying a happiness he had never been able to give her. She looked at him, steady, calm, unshaken. That gaze told him more than words ever could. She no longer belonged to him. She was no longer the woman he abandoned. And the man standing beside her? He wasn't just her partner. He was her protector, her anchor, her safe place. For the first time in his life, Damien Cross felt fear. Not of losing a contract, not of failure, but of facing the consequences of a decision he could never undo. Before we continue with this powerful story, I'd like to welcome you to Mr. Ross' Story Trail. If you believe love and respect should never be taken for granted, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and stay with me until the end. This is one story you will never forget. The music carried on, the conversations buzzed, but for Damien, all of it had gone silent. His world shrank to the woman he once dismissed, the children who bore, his face, and the man whose arm she now held with unshakable pride. It wasn't just a reunion, it was a reckoning. Years before that night, Damien Cross was a man consumed by hunger. Not the kind that sought food, but the kind that devoured loyalty, love, and warmth in exchange for power. His empire was everything to him. Numbers, contracts, endless growth. He measured his worth not by affection, but by profit margins, and how quickly others bowed to his will. Beside him stood Lena, his young wife. Gentle-hearted, endlessly devoted, she had entered the marriage believing she had found not only a husband but a partner, someone she could build a life with. She carried a tenderness in her soul that softened even his harshest moods, at least at first. When he returned home weary from battles in the boardroom, it was her smile, her simple words of encouragement, that once gave him peace. But as his ambition sharpened, her love began to feel to him like a distraction. She wanted evenings together. He wanted nights filled with strategy. She dreamed of family. He dreamed of skyscrapers bearing his name. The balance of their worlds slipped further apart with each passing month. It was during this drift that Vanessa appeared. Elegant, sharp, and endlessly aware of what men like Damien craved. She knew how to make herself indispensable, whispers of advice wrapped in flattery, gestures that mirrored his ambitions instead of challenging them. She didn't ask for warmth or presence, she offered allure and the promise of greater heights. Lena sensed it, even before the whispers reached her ears. The long nights that turned into longer absences, the cold replies that replaced his once tender words. The way he began to treat her love as a burden rather than a gift. Her heart ached, but she still clung to hope, believing the man she had married would remember the vows he once spoke. She would stay awake waiting for him, the dinner table set for two, her hands folded in silence as the hours stretched on. He never noticed the quiet tears she wiped away before slipping into bed alone. And Damien? He convinced himself he was simply doing what had to be done, choosing power over sentiment. Vanessa's presence only fueled this belief. She whispered to him that Lena was too fragile, too simple, too unfit to walk beside a man destined for greatness. The cruelest part was not her words, but how easily he began to believe them. The story of betrayal was already writing itself, long before Lena ever held proof of new life within her. Long before she knew that the heart beating inside her would one day remind Damien of what he had thrown away. But on those nights she only prayed for him. She only wanted his arms around her again. She only wanted him to remember the love they had once shared. One morning, as the city outside awakened with its usual rhythm, Lena held a small strip in trembling hands. Her heart raced, her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. A new life was growing within her. In that fragile moment, she imagined everything changing. She pictured Damien holding their child, perhaps softening in ways she had long prayed for. She imagined family breakfasts, laughter filling their home, a future not built only on numbers and contracts, but on love. This child, she believed, would be their bridge back to one another. That evening, when Damien finally returned, she rushed to him with a smile that glowed brighter than the chandelier above them. "We're going to be parents," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement, her hands reaching for his. But Damien's reaction was not what she expected. His expression didn't light up. His arms didn't pull her close. Instead, his brows furrowed, his jaw tightened. He pulled away as though her words were chains meant to hold him back. "Lena, this isn't the right time," he muttered, his tone sharper than the knives resting on the dining table. "Do you understand what this will mean for everything I've been building? A child isn't convenient right now." The air left her lungs. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. She searched his eyes, desperate to find even a flicker of joy, of shared hope. But there was none. Only calculation, only resistance. Days turned into weeks, and instead of warmth, she was met with cold indifference. His late nights grew longer, his excuses thinner. When he spoke, it was with irritation, as though her pregnancy were nothing more than an obstacle placed in his path. Vanessa's presence grew stronger during this time. Lena saw the subtle glances exchanged, the hushed conversations that ended the moment she entered the room. Vanessa's words, though never spoken aloud in Lena's presence, hung in the silence between her and Damien. "You don't need her," Vanessa had once whispered to him at a gathering. Her, lips so close to his ear that it could almost be mistaken for intimacy. "She'll only weigh you down. You were made for more. I can give you more." And Damien listened. Each passing day, Lena felt the distance grow. She carried life within her, yet felt emptier than she ever had before. She pressed her hands against her stomach at night, whispering promises to the child that she would love them enough for both parents, even if their father had already turned his heart away. Her hope for reconciliation dimmed with each cold glance, each dismissive word. She was living with a stranger now, a man who valued his empire more than the miracle growing inside her. And deep inside, she feared what her heart already knew. The day would come when Damien Cross would make a choice. And it would not be her. The evening had started quietly. Lena had prepared his favorite meal, setting the table with care, hoping for even the smallest spark of closeness. The house was warm, with soft candlelight, the scent of roasted herbs lingering in the air. She sat waiting, hands folded gently over her growing stomach, whispering silent prayers that tonight would be different. But when Damien finally arrived, his eyes were distant, his shoulders stiff, his attention already elsewhere. He barely noticed the dinner she had worked so hard to prepare. He tossed his jacket across the chair, loosened his tie, and poured himself a drink without so much as a glance in her direction. "Damien," Lena said softly, her voice carrying both hope and desperation, "please sit with me. We need to talk." He looked at her for a brief moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh that carried more impatience than care, he sat across from her. She reached across the table, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his hand. "This baby, our baby, can change everything. We can be a family. Isn't that what you wanted once?" His hand pulled back. His eyes narrowed, his tone icy. "What I want, Lena, is freedom to finish what I've started. I can't build an empire while chained to your needs." Her chest constricted. The words struck her harder than any blow. "Chained?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't understand," he said, his jaw tight. "There are opportunities in front of me that will never come again. Investors, partnerships, expansion. I can't afford distractions. And you, this," his eyes flickered to her stomach, "is exactly that." Lena's tears blurred her vision, spilling silently onto her hands. She searched his face for even the faintest glimmer of the man she had once loved. But he was gone. In his place was someone she barely recognized, someone who had already chosen ambition over love. And then, as if to seal the wound, the sound of heels echoed through the doorway. Vanessa appeared, draped in elegance, her presence confident, her smile faint but victorious. She didn't need to say a word. Her very existence beside Damien said it all. Lena rose to her feet, her entire body trembling. She pressed one hand protectively against her stomach, the other clutching the edge of the chair for balance. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I gave you my heart, Damien. I gave you everything, but I can't stay where I'm not wanted, not for me and not for this child." Damien didn't move. He didn't reach for her. His silence was the loudest rejection of all. Gathering what strength she had left, Lena walked past Vanessa, her steps heavy but resolute. Each footfall was a declaration. She would not beg for love that had already been thrown away. The door closed behind her, and with it, the life she had once dreamed of vanished. She left with nothing but her pain, her unborn child, and the fragile spark of hope that somewhere beyond this heartbreak she could begin again. For Damien Cross, it was a choice made in arrogance. For Lena, it was the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. Lena sat by the window one evening, her hands resting over her small but growing belly. The city lights flickered in the distance, but her eyes were fixed on something beyond the glass. In her heart, she believed this child was more than just new life. This child was a second chance, a reason for Damien to soften, to remember the vows they had spoken when life was simpler, when love was still the center of their world. Every heartbeat inside her gave her courage. She rehearsed words in her mind, imagining how she might tell him again, this time with more certainty, more tenderness, hoping he would finally understand. She believed that somewhere beneath his hardened shell was still the man who had once looked at her as if she were his everything. But Damien was slipping further away with each passing day. His phone was always buzzing with urgent calls, his evenings filled with meetings that stretched into midnight. When he was home, his mind was elsewhere, calculating risks, analyzing markets, chasing after figures that promised more power. And then there was Vanessa. She was always near, always finding reasons to be at Damien's side. Her voice dripped with admiration when she spoke to him, praising his every decision, feeding the fire of his ambition. She laughed at his sharp remarks, leaned close when whispering advice, and made herself the partner he thought he needed. "Lena doesn't understand what you're building," Vanessa would murmur when Damien's doubts surfaced. "She'll hold you back, but with me, you'll rise higher than you've ever dreamed." Damien listened, too often, too willingly. Lena noticed the change, the way his eyes no longer lingered on her, the way he avoided conversations about the baby. She tried to reach him, cooking his favorite meals, waiting by the door for his return, pressing his hand to her stomach in hopes he would feel the miracle growing inside. But he pulled away, as if the very thought of fatherhood was an inconvenience he couldn't afford. One night, she waited with candles lit, her heart brimming with fragile hope. When Damien walked in, she took his hand quickly before he could brush past. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just listen. This baby is part of us, Damien. It's not a burden. It's love. It's family. Isn't that worth something more than all those contracts you chase?" His hand stiffened in hers. He looked at her with a coldness that sliced through her heart. "You don't understand. Family doesn't build empires. Sacrifices have to be made." Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Sacrifices?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "You mean me. You mean us." He didn't deny it. In that silence, she felt the final thread of their bond snap. He had chosen power, wealth, and Vanessa's whispered promises over the woman who had loved him without condition, over the child who had never even been given a chance to be loved by their father. That night, Lena lay awake with one hand over her belly, whispering soft words to her unborn child. "You are not a mistake. You are not a burden. I will love you enough for both of us." Her tears soaked the pillow, but her voice remained steady for the little, one who could not yet hear but whose presence gave her strength. Damien slept soundly in the next room, oblivious to the breaking heart just a few steps away. And though Lena's body trembled with grief, she knew a storm was coming. The storm of leaving behind everything she once thought was forever. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, but the warmth it carried never reached Lena's heart. She had prepared breakfast, her gestures small attempts to mend what was quickly shattering. Pancakes stacked neatly, coffee steaming, fruit arranged in a way she hoped might catch his attention. She sat waiting, her hands absently circling the curve of her stomach, whispering. To the child within that today, perhaps, their father might notice. When Damien entered, his eyes weren't on her, nor on the meal laid out with care. They were on the folder in his hand, the papers inside far more important to him than the family seated at his table. He barely offered her a glance before setting the folder down and pouring himself coffee. Lena tried, her voice soft but full of fragile hope. "Please, sit. Eat with me. I want us to talk about the baby, about us." But before she could finish, he cut her off, his words cold. "Lena, enough. We've been through this." Her lips trembled. "Through this? Damien, we're supposed to be building a life together, not tearing it apart. This child is ours, not just mine. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" His jaw tightened. He pushed the coffee aside and leaned forward, his tone sharp, his patience gone. "What it means, Lena, is delay. It means weakness. While you sit here hoping for bedtime stories and lullabies, I'm out there fighting for deals that could change our lives. But you refuse to understand." Her breath caught. "Understand?" she whispered. "I have stood by you through every late night, every moment you chose your work over me. I have loved you when you gave me nothing in return. And now, when I need you most, you call me weak?" The silence stretched between them, heavy and cruel. And then, before she could gather herself, another voice pierced the moment. Vanessa's heels clicked softly as she entered the room without hesitation, her perfume trailing behind her. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged, her eyes sliding over Lena with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Damien," she said smoothly, her hand brushing his shoulder. "The investors are waiting for an answer. They won't wait forever." Lena's chest tightened. The sight of Vanessa so comfortably in her home, speaking with such authority, left no room for doubt. She wasn't just at his side in business. She was already carving a place in his life where Lena once stood. Damien didn't flinch. He didn't even glance at Lena as he replied, "Tell them I'll be there by noon." Lena rose to her feet, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of devotion. "So this is it? You choose her, you choose them, and you leave me and your child with nothing?" Finally, his eyes met hers, but they were cold, unyielding. "I have to think about my future, Lena. If you can't keep up, then maybe you shouldn't be here." The room spun. Her hands instinctively cradled her belly, shielding the only piece of hope she had left. Her tears blurred the faces before her, but her steps were steady as she turned away. She walked past Vanessa, past Damien, past the life she had fought so hard to preserve. Her voice cracked as she paused at the door, not looking back. "One day, Damien, you'll see what you've lost, and when that day comes it will be too late." The door closed behind her with a quiet finality. No luggage, no wealth, no security, only her pain, her unborn child, and the faint promise that love could still exist somewhere beyond this house that no longer felt like home. Damien sat in silence, his jaw tense, his hands gripping the folder as if it were a lifeline. Vanessa smiled faintly, her hand sliding over his. "You did the right thing," she whispered. But deep in the quiet corners of his soul, Damien felt a flicker, an ache he quickly buried beneath pride and ambition. Lena, however, walked into the unknown, broken yet carrying the most precious piece of herself. The child who would one day remind her that love, though fragile, could be reborn. The night air was cold as Lena stepped out of the mansion that had once been her home. She carried nothing but a small handbag and the fragile life within her. Every step she took was heavy, each one echoing the truth she had fought so hard to ignore: she was no longer wanted. The streets stretched endlessly before her, filled with strangers who had no idea that the woman walking past them was carrying both heartbreak and hope. Each light overhead flickered like a reminder of her fears. Where will you go? How will you survive? At last, she found shelter in a modest inn, its walls bare, its silence suffocating. Sitting on the narrow bed, Lena pressed both hands over her stomach and finally allowed the tears to flow. "I don't know how I'll do this," she whispered into the quiet. "But I promise you, I will. I'll keep you safe. I'll love you enough for both of us." The days blurred together after that. She searched desperately for work, but her condition made employers turn her away. Her jewelry, once symbols of wealth and status, was sold piece by piece, each sale buying her another meal, another night of shelter. The nights were the hardest. Alone, she would think back to the man she once loved, the warmth of his touch, the laughter they shared in a life that now felt like someone else's memory. Those thoughts no longer soothed her, they stung like open wounds. But every flutter, every kick inside her gave her strength. Her child became her anchor. When despair clawed at her, she pressed her hands to her belly and whispered promises of a better life. One evening, in the stillness of her tiny room, she pulled out a small notebook and began to write letters to her unborn child. Words of love, of pain, of courage. She wrote, "Today was hard, but you gave me the strength to go on. One day, you'll know that you were the reason I never gave up." That notebook became her companion, her secret refuge. And yet, through the struggle, she began to change. She no longer prayed for Damien's return. She no longer begged fate to soften his heart. Slowly, painfully, she shifted her hope to the future she could build with her child, even if it meant walking this road alone. You know, hearing Lena's pain right now, I have to ask you, what would you do if you were in her place? If the person you loved most turned their back on you at your most vulnerable moment, would you still hold on, or would you walk away like she did? Let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear your heart on this. That night, Lena tucked her notebook under her pillow, her tears soaking the pages of her whispered promises. She pressed her palms against her belly, closing her eyes. "We'll make it," she whispered to her child, not because of him, but in spite of him. And though the room was quiet, and the world outside indifferent, a flame of resilience flickered inside her, a flame that would only grow brighter with time. The months passed slowly, each day testing Lena's endurance. Her body grew heavier, her steps slower, but her will remained unbroken. She took odd jobs where she could, sewing for neighbors, cleaning small shops, anything to stretch her meager income. She ate less so she could save more, her only thought being the child she carried. When loneliness pressed hardest against her chest, she whispered softly to her unborn baby, her hand cradling her belly as if to shield them from the world. "You are my future. You are my reason. And I will never let anyone make you feel unwanted." The night her child came into the world was stormless, but filled with its own thunder. Pain surged through her body as she lay in a dim hospital room, the sheets damp with sweat, her cries muffled by sheer determination. No one held her hand. No voice reassured her. She fought through the hours of agony with nothing but the thought of the tiny life waiting to meet her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound she had longed for filled the room, the sharp, beautiful cry of her child. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the nurse placed the baby in her arms. She traced her fingers over the newborn's tiny features, eyes closed tight, mouth trembling, fists clenched as though already fighting the world. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Welcome to the world, my love. I swear you will never feel the emptiness I have known." The nurse asked gently, "Do you have someone to call?" Lena smiled faintly, though her heart cracked again. "No," she whispered. "It's just us now." She named the baby with care, choosing a name that carried strength, a name that would never let them forget they were born from courage, not abandonment. Meanwhile, Damien's life spiraled further into Vanessa's grasp. He signed deal after deal, each one stacking his empire higher. Lavish parties, new partnerships, the applause of men who admired his ruthlessness. It seemed he had everything. Vanessa stood beside him, like a glittering jewel, the perfect companion for the image he wanted the world to see. But the truth was emptier than the champagne glasses that littered his nights. Success came, yes, but so did exhaustion. And every so often, when the celebrations faded and silence settled, an image flickered at the edges of his mind, Lena's tearful eyes as she walked away, her hand pressed over her stomach, her words echoing, "One day, Damien, you'll see what you've lost." He silenced the memory quickly, drowning it with more work, more distractions, more of Vanessa's intoxicating promises. He told himself he had chosen correctly, that weakness had no place in his life. But deep within, that memory never truly left. Back in her small apartment, Lena rocked her newborn to sleep, the candlelight flickering across her tired face. She sang softly, her voice shaky but full of love. Exhaustion weighed on her body, but her spirit found new strength. The tiny heartbeat against her chest reminded her that she was not broken. She was beginning again. And though she had lost everything she once thought she needed, she realized in that moment that she had gained something greater, the chance to love without condition, to give her child the devotion Damien had thrown away. With the baby finally asleep, Lena opened her notebook and wrote a final letter for the night. "You will never know loneliness, my child. You will never wonder if you are loved. I will be mother and father. I will give you more than he ever could. This is my vow to you." Damien signed another contract the next morning, his name plastered across headlines praising his genius. Crowds applauded, reporters shouted questions, Vanessa smiled at his side. He basked in the glory, but when the cameras turned away and the cheers faded, his reflection in the glass tower stared back at him, hard, hollow, and alone. He had wealth, but not love. power but no peace. And somewhere far from the glittering lights of his empire, Lena cradled their child. Close, her whispered lullabies stronger than any empire Damien could ever build. Years had passed since the night Lena walked out of Damien's house with nothing but her tears and the child inside her. What once felt like the end of her world had, through time and endurance, become the beginning of a new life. The small apartment that once felt suffocating eventually gave way to something brighter. She had worked tirelessly, taking small opportunities and turning them into stepping stones. The timid young woman who once whispered to herself in the dark had grown into someone who no longer bowed to fear. Her strength became evident not only in the way she carried herself, but in the way others looked at her. Where once her eyes had been filled with sorrow, now they shone with calm confidence. She learned to walk into rooms without shrinking, to speak without hesitation, to live without apology. On a quiet morning, she stood before the mirror in her elegant dressing gown, brushing back strands of her hair. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her, no longer the fragile girl, waiting for scraps of affection, but a woman who had carved out her own path. The sound of giggles echoed from down the hall, and her heart lifted instantly. Two little voices tumbled over one another, full of energy and joy. Her twins burst into the room, a boy and a girl, both with eyes that glimmered like hers and features that carried undeniable traces of their father. Yet, unlike their father, they radiated warmth. The boy was lively, endlessly curious, always asking questions that kept her laughing. The girl was gentle but sharp, her observations keen beyond her years. Together, they filled the home with a happiness Lena once thought she would never know. "Mom," the boy shouted, holding up a drawing. Crayon lines stretched across the page, messy but full of love. Two stick figures stood hand in hand with a taller one beside them. "It's us, me, sis, and Dad." Lena's eyes softened as she knelt beside him. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. You're very talented." The little girl grinned, hugging her mother tightly. "We made breakfast for you. Well, Daddy helped. But we did most of it." At the mention of Daddy, Lena's heart warmed in a way that never failed to humble her. Ethan, her husband, her partner, her safe harbor. He appeared at the doorway then, carrying a tray with neatly arranged plates and a smile that was both kind and reassuring. His presence filled the room with ease, not dominance. He looked at Lena as though she were still the most extraordinary sight in the world, even after years of marriage. "Morning," he said gently, setting the tray down. He kissed her forehead with tenderness that still made her breath catch. "We thought you deserved a little surprise today." The children climbed onto the bed, proud of their efforts, while Ethan handed Lena a plate. He didn't just give her food, he gave her peace. Peace she had never known in her first marriage. As Lena looked around the room, her children laughing, her husband smiling, her heart steady, she felt something deeper than happiness. She felt whole. Once, years ago, she had set the table for Damien with trembling hands, praying he would notice her effort. He never did. The silence of those nights haunted her. Now, her children's laughter replaced that silence. Ethan's love replaced the emptiness, and the woman. She had become no longer waited for scraps of attention. She was cherished, celebrated, and free. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had shaped her, carved strength where weakness once lived, and taught her to demand more than half-hearted love. Her story was no longer one of abandonment. It was one of renewal. The years had reshaped Lena into a woman. People noticed the moment she entered a room, not because she sought attention, but because her quiet strength commanded it. She no longer walked with her eyes lowered, afraid to take up space. Now her chin was high, her steps measured, her presence unmistakable. At charity events, business gatherings, and cultural functions, whispers often followed her, not of pity, but of admiration. People spoke of her kindness, her poise, her resilience. Some knew fragments of her story, though she rarely shared details. They only saw the woman who stood beside Ethan with grace that made others pause. On one particular evening, she accompanied Ethan to a fundraising dinner. She wore a simple but elegant gown, her hair pinned delicately at her neck, her smile radiant. As she entered the hall, a few guests leaned close to one another, murmuring, "That's Mrs. Carter. She's remarkable, isn't she?" Ethan offered her his arm, his eyes soft with the affection that never wavered. To him, she wasn't just remarkable in public, she was remarkable in every ordinary moment at home. While Ethan discussed business with a colleague, Lena knelt to speak with, a child tugging at her dress hem, a shy girl attending with her parents. Lena bent down, listened intently, and encouraged her gently. That simple gesture spoke louder than any speech, reminding everyone around that her strength was never hardened into pride. It remained rooted in compassion. Once, years ago, she had sat silent at Damien's side during similar events. She had felt invisible, shrinking behind his shadow while he basked in praise. Every word she tried to contribute had been brushed aside, every smile ignored. But here, standing beside Ethan, she was not a shadow. She was an equal, her laughter welcomed, her thoughts valued. Ethan introduced her proudly, often saying, "This is my wife Lena. She's the true heart of everything we do." Back at home, her children were blossoming with the same vibrance. Her son, now a lively 8-year-old, filled notebooks with inventions and sketches. He was curious about how things worked, often dismantling toys just to rebuild them. One afternoon, he rushed to her side, holding up a makeshift contraption built from scraps of wood and string. "Mom, look, when I pull this, the wheel turns. Do you think one day I could make something real, something big?" Lena smiled, pulling him close. "You already have, sweetheart. And yes, one day you'll make more than you can imagine." Her daughter, thoughtful and observant, loved books. She often curled up in the corner of the library Ethan had built for them, her small fingers tracing lines of poetry. Sometimes she would recite verses to Lena, her voice steady, her words surprisingly wise for her age. "Mom," she once asked as they read together, "how did you know Dad was the one who would love us forever?" The question struck Lena's heart deeply. She brushed a hand through her daughter's hair and answered softly, "Because he never made me doubt it. Not once." Her daughter smiled knowingly, tucking her head into Lena's shoulder as if the answer had been enough. Lena often marveled at the life she had now. She had not only rebuilt herself, but had built a world where her children thrived, where her husband's love was steady, and where her own heart was finally at peace. Every now and then, memories of Damien surfaced, but they no longer pierced her with pain. Instead, they reminded her of how far she had come. She had once been a woman abandoned with nothing. Now she was a woman who had everything that truly mattered. On a quiet evening, after the children had gone to bed, Lena stepped onto the balcony of their home. The city stretched out beneath them, lights twinkling against the night sky. The soft breeze carried her hair over her shoulders as she wrapped her shawl tighter. Ethan joined her moments later, placing a steaming cup of tea in her hands. He didn't ask if she wanted it. He already knew her well enough to know she needed it. That was the difference. With Damien, she had once begged for scraps of attention. With Ethan, she never had to ask. He gave, freely and without condition. "You've been quiet tonight," Ethan said gently, leaning against the railing beside her. His voice was calm, his presence steady. "I was just thinking," Lena admitted, her eyes on the skyline, "about where life has taken me, about how different things are now." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Different good, I hope." She turned to him, her lips curling into a smile. "The best kind of different." Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze softening the way it always did when he looked at her. Then, without a word, he pulled her gently into his arms. She melted into him, her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. It was a sound that reassured her more than anything else in the world. With Damien, silence had been suffocating. With Ethan, silence was safe. He tilted her chin up, his eyes searching hers. "You deserve every happiness, Lena, and I'll spend my whole life making sure you never forget that." Her throat tightened with emotion. She whispered back, "And I'll spend mine being grateful I found you." He kissed her then, slow, unhurried, full of tenderness. It wasn't the desperate, fleeting passion of someone trying to prove something. It was steady, certain, like a promise carved into the very air around them. Later that night, they curled together in bed. Ethan traced lazy circles across her arm, the children's soft laughter from earlier still echoing faintly in their minds. Lena breathed deeply, her body relaxed against his. "You know," Ethan said quietly, "the strongest people are the ones who've had every reason to give up, but chose to keep going. That's you, Lena. You don't just survive, you rise." She turned, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "I didn't rise alone. You gave me a reason to believe in love again." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You would have risen anyway. But I'm grateful I get to walk beside you while you do." Her heart swelled at his words. In Damien's world, she had once felt invisible, her love unreciprocated, her worth diminished. In Ethan's world, she was seen, cherished, and adored. She remembered the nights with Damien, lying awake alone while he stayed out with Vanessa. The emptiness of their home, the silence that screamed louder than any words. Now she lay wrapped in Ethan's arms, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and peace. The difference was stark. It wasn't just that she had remarried. It was that she had finally learned what love was meant to feel like. The love between them was not loud or ostentatious. It was in the small things, him reaching for her hand without thinking, her laughter bubbling easily in. His presence, the way he tucked the children in at night, as though they were his own flesh and blood. It was in every moment that reminded Lena she had not only survived abandonment, she had triumphed over it. The morning sun spilled into the Carter household, filling the rooms with a glow that seemed to match the laughter echoing within. The twins, now full of life and curiosity, had turned the living room into their stage, their drawings and toys scattered across the carpet, while their voices filled the air with stories only children could create. Lena leaned against the doorway, watching them. Her son, bold and energetic, stood on a chair holding a makeshift cape. "I'm the greatest explorer," he declared, pointing his wooden sword toward imaginary lands. His sister sat cross-legged nearby, a notebook in her lap, carefully documenting his adventures as though she were the storyteller of his world. "You're supposed to fight the dragon," she reminded him with a playful frown, "not just wander around." He turned dramatically, nearly losing his balance. "But the dragon is my friend, right, Mom?" Lena laughed, the sound carrying warmth through the house. "If you say he's your friend, then who am I to argue with the bravest explorer in the kingdom?" The boy puffed up proudly, while his sister scribbled furiously in her notebook. It was in these ordinary moments that Lena felt the extraordinary truth of her journey. Once she had walked through life in silence, unseen and unheard. Now her home was filled with laughter, curiosity, and joy. Her children were not growing up in fear or emptiness. They were thriving, learning to dream boldly and love openly. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. The twins ran to him, their arms wrapping tightly around his legs. He crouched down, scooping them into a hug that left no doubt in their hearts. He was their father in every way that mattered. "Daddy, guess what?" the boy shouted, holding up his cape. "I fought a dragon today, and I wrote it all down," his sister added proudly, holding up her notebook. "It's going to be a real book one day." Ethan's smile was broad, his eyes soft. "Well, it looks like I have two geniuses under my roof, one who conquers worlds and one who writes them." He looked up at Lena, who stood watching with quiet joy. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange was everything words couldn't. To capture gratitude, respect, and a love that grew deeper each day. Later, as dinner filled the air with savory aromas, the family sat together around the table. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple meal Lena had prepared with Ethan's help. But to her, it was priceless. The twins argued playfully over who got the bigger slice of bread, their laughter infectious. Ethan reached over to pour Lena's water before his own, a small gesture but one that never went unnoticed. As they ate, Lena looked around the table and realized this was what she had once dreamed of: connection, laughter, warmth. The ache of her past no longer haunted her here. Instead, it served as a reminder of how precious this present truly was. There had been a time when she sat at a dining table alone, meals growing cold as she waited for Damien to come home. The clink of her fork against the plate had been her only companion, silence swallowing her whole. Now, that silence was replaced with children's laughter and Ethan's gentle teasing. The cold emptiness had been exchanged for the fullness of a family who chose each other every single day. After dinner, the twins begged for one more story before bed. Lena tucked them in, their eyes heavy with sleep as she read from her daughter's notebook. The story was whimsical and silly, about an explorer and his dragon. But it ended with a simple truth that left Lena's throat tight. The explorer was never afraid, because he knew his family was always with him. She kissed their foreheads and whispered, "Always." The years had been kind to Lena, but more than kindness, they had revealed her strength. She no longer carried herself as someone who had been abandoned. She walked with the poise of a woman who had built a new life and claimed every moment of joy it brought her. At a community banquet one evening, she entered the hall on Ethan's arm. Her gown shimmered softly under the lights, her smile serene yet magnetic. Conversations hushed as eyes followed her, not in gossip or pity, but in admiration. She greeted people warmly, her words thoughtful, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. Ethan stood proudly at her side, never overshadowing her, always honoring her. More than once that evening he caught himself simply watching her, listening intently to others, encouraging them, making them feel valued. She had become the kind of woman whose quiet influence changed entire rooms. When the event ended, they stepped outside together, their car waiting at the curb. Ethan turned to her, slipping his jacket over her shoulders. "You know," he said with a smile, "I think half the room forgot why they were there once you walked in." Lena laughed softly, shaking her head. "I doubt that." "I don't," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You shine, Lena, and it's an honor just to stand beside you." Her heart swelled at his words, not because they surprised her, but because they reflected the love he showed her daily. It was steady, unshaken, as natural as breathing. At home later that night, the twins were sprawled across the living room rug, surrounded by books and half-finished art projects. Their laughter echoed through the halls as they competed in a game they had invented, one that only made sense to them. Lena joined them on the floor, her gown pooling around her as she leaned in to admire their creations. Ethan soon followed, loosening his tie and dropping down beside them. Their son proudly held up a model he had built from scraps of cardboard. "Mom, Dad, look what I made. One day, I'm going to build something that changes the world." "You already have," Ethan said warmly, pulling him into a hug. Their daughter, with her notebook clutched against her chest, grinned. "And I'm going to write the story of how he did it." Lena kissed her forehead, her eyes brimming with pride. "And I'll be your first reader." The four of them stayed there, laughing, teasing, playing, until the clock chimed late into the night. For Lena, these were the moments that defined happiness, not the gowns, not the events, not the admiration of strangers. It was here, on the living room floor with her children's laughter filling the air, that she felt whole. Later, when the twins were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Lena sat with Ethan on the porch. The night air was calm, the sky scattered with stars. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Sometimes she whispered, "I wonder if I deserve all of this. You, the children, this peace." Ethan tightened his arm around her. "You don't just deserve it, Lena. You created it. You chose strength when life gave you every reason to give up. That's why we're here." Her eyes glistened as she looked up at him. She smiled, not a smile of disbelief, but of contentment. She believed him. She believed in herself. "You know, watching Lena's life now reminds me of something important. Pain doesn't last forever. Healing takes time, but transformation is always possible. If you know someone who needs that reminder, share this story with them. It might give them the courage they need." As the stars shone above and Ethan's arms wrapped securely around her, Lena knew the truth. Her story was no longer about loss. It was about triumph, love, and the kind of happiness that nothing and no one could take away. The evening was calm, the kind that carried a hush over the Carter estate. The twins had finally gone to bed, their soft giggles fading into silence. Lena stepped onto the balcony outside her room, the night sky painted with countless stars. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and leaned against the railing, breathing deeply. Moments later, Ethan appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her with the ease of a man who knew her rhythms as if they were his own. "Chamomile," he said with a smile. "I figured you could use something to relax." She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. That simple contact made her heart flutter, not with nervousness, but with gratitude. After everything she had lived through, this was what she cherished most: being seen, cared for, and loved without condition. They stood quietly for a while, the air between them comfortable. With Damien, silence had once been suffocating, filled with neglect and unspoken disappointment. With Ethan, silence was soothing, a shared space that didn't need to be filled with words to be meaningful. "You look thoughtful," Ethan said finally, tilting his head toward her. Lena smiled softly. "Just grateful. Sometimes I can't believe this is my life. You, the kids, this peace." Ethan turned fully toward her, his hand brushing her hair away from her face. His touch was gentle, reverent. "You've earned every moment of it, Lena. You've carried more than anyone should have to, and still, you stand here shining." Her throat tightened with emotion. She lowered her gaze briefly before lifting it again to meet his eyes. "I only shine because you give me a place to—" His smile deepened, tender but unshaken. He set his teacup aside and took her hands in his. "You'd shine anywhere, even in the darkest places. But I'll spend my life making sure you never have to walk in the dark again." She felt the sincerity of his words sink deep into her chest. He leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was soft, deliberate, full of promise. It wasn't hurried or shallow. It was steady, grounding, and true. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Lena. Not just for the woman you are today, but for the strength you showed even when life tried to break you. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of knowing that for the first time in her life, love didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. Later, they sat together in the living room, the fire casting a warm glow across the space. Lena curled against Ethan's chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his hand. He read softly from a book, his deep voice steady, comforting. She closed her eyes, not needing to hear every word, simply savoring the way he made even the simplest acts feel sacred. Every gesture, every look, every touch from Ethan reminded her of what it meant to be truly cherished. When the fire dimmed and the night grew late, Ethan set the book aside and looked down at her. "You know, Lena," he whispered, "love isn't just about grand gestures. It's in the little things, like tea on the balcony, or holding your hand when words fall short, or making sure you always know you're my first thought every day." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "And my last thought every night," she finished for him. He kissed the crown of her head, holding her tighter. "Exactly." The next morning, the sound of laughter drifted into the bedroom before the sunlight had fully spilled through the curtains. Lena stirred, stretching beneath the soft sheets, her body still heavy with sleep. She listened for a moment, the melody of her children's giggles rising and falling, mingling with Ethan's voice. Curious, she slipped on her robe and padded down the hallway. What she found made her heart swell. In the kitchen, Ethan stood at the stove with an apron tied clumsily around his waist. Flour dusted his shoulders, and batter streaked his cheek. On the counter beside him sat the twins, each armed with a wooden spoon and a determination to help. "Dad, you're doing it wrong," their son declared, laughing as Ethan pretended to stir the pancake mix with exaggerated seriousness. "Oh, am I?" Ethan replied, raising his brows. "Well, then maybe you should show me how it's done." The boy hopped down eagerly, guiding his father with all the confidence of an expert. His sister clapped her hands, cheering them on as if pancakes were the most important creation in the world. Lena leaned against the doorway, smiling so wide it made her cheeks ache. Ethan turned, catching sight of her. His expression softened instantly. "Good morning, love," he greeted, his voice warm. "You're just in time. Your chefs have prepared a masterpiece." The twins rushed to her, their little hands tugging at her robe. "Mom, we made breakfast with Dad. Come see." She let them lead her to the table, where a plate of slightly lopsided pancakes waited, drizzled with syrup and decorated with strawberries in uneven shapes. "They're perfect," Lena said sincerely, pulling her children into a hug. Then she looked up at Ethan, who was grinning with flour still on his cheek. "And you, Mr. Carter, might just be the most handsome chef I've ever seen." He laughed, wiping his hands on the apron before pulling her into a brief kiss. "Careful, or I'll start thinking this apron suits me." The twins groaned playfully. "Ew, Mom and Dad are kissing again." Lena laughed, her heart full. These little exchanges were simple, but they meant more to her than any extravagant gesture ever could. Later that afternoon, the family sprawled out in the garden. The twins played tag across the grass, their shrieks echoing joy, while Lena and Ethan sat together on a blanket. She leaned back against him, his arms wrapped comfortably around her as they watched the children chase one another. "You know," Lena said softly, "it's in moments like these I feel the most grateful. Not the parties, not the trips, not the big milestones. Just this, us, them." Ethan kissed her temple. "That's because this is what lasts. Love built on little moments can weather anything." Her fingers intertwined with his, resting on her lap. She let the quiet sink in, the comfort of his heartbeat against her back, the laughter of her children carrying on the breeze. This was intimacy in its purest form, not just passion, but partnership. Not just romance, but family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, Ethan lay back on the blanket, pulling Lena down beside him. They watched the children from where they rested, her head nestled against his shoulder. "I think we're the luckiest people in the world," he whispered. Lena tilted her face toward him, her eyes glistening. "Not lucky," she corrected gently. "Blessed, because we chose each other, because we kept going when life tried to stop us." Ethan cupped her face, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. "And I'll keep choosing you every single day." Her heart swelled, not with the uncertainty she once knew, but with the deep assurance that his words were true. The house was quiet that evening. The twins were asleep, their soft breaths carrying through the halls. Lena lingered by the window of her bedroom, the moonlight casting a gentle glow across her features. She wore a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for a moment she simply allowed herself to breathe in the stillness. The door opened softly, and Ethan stepped in. He had loosened his tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes warm the moment they found hers. He crossed the room without a word, as though drawn by a force he couldn't resist. "You look like a dream," he murmured, brushing his fingers through her hair. Lena's lips curved into a soft smile. "And you look like the man who still manages to surprise me, even after all these years." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist. The world outside vanished, leaving only the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against hers. With Damien, closeness had once been cold, a formality. With Ethan, it was alive, tender, real. They swayed gently to the music that drifted faintly from the radio, their bodies moving in sync without thought. Ethan pressed a kiss against her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. His touch was reverent, as though every kiss was a promise. "You are cherished, you are safe, you are mine." "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" he asked quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Lena nodded, her throat tight. "All the time. But what amazes me most isn't how far I've come. It's that I don't have to walk alone anymore." His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing softly along her cheek. "Never again." He kissed her deeply then, not hurried, not desperate, but slow and unshakably certain. It was a kiss that told her she was loved not just for the woman she had become, but for the woman she had always been. When they pulled away, Ethan led her to the bed, where they sat side by side. He didn't rush, didn't demand. He simply held her hand, their fingers intertwined. Their intimacy was not about passion alone, but about presence. It was about the comfort of knowing that in this space she was fully seen, fully wanted. Lena leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. The rise and fall of his breathing soothed her, grounding her in a peace she once thought she'd never know. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I still wake up and think it's all a dream, that this love, this home, this life can't be real." Ethan kissed the crown of her head, tightening his hold. "Then let me be the one to remind you it is. Every single day." The night stretched on, filled not with extravagance but with quiet connection. Ethan listened as Lena spoke of her hopes for the children, of her dreams for their future together. She listened as he spoke of his admiration for her strength, of how deeply he respected the woman she was. Their conversation gave way to laughter, their laughter to soft kisses, and those kisses to the kind of closeness that carried no shame, no fear, only love. In the hush of that night, Lena realized something profound. Intimacy was not about perfection or about filling silences with empty words. It was about belonging. With Ethan, she belonged, not as someone tolerated, but as someone treasured. And in that belonging, she found not only love, but freedom. The weekend brought with it one of Lena's favorite traditions, family nights. No parties, no business meetings, no distractions. Just the four of them together, making memories that would last a lifetime. The living room was transformed into a little haven. The twins had spread blankets and pillows across the floor, turning it into a makeshift theater. Bowls of popcorn sat ready, and Lena had baked cookies earlier in the day that now filled the air with a warm sweetness. Ethan dimmed the lights and settled beside Lena, while the children nestled themselves between their parents. The movie began, but it quickly became clear that the story on the screen was less interesting than the story unfolding in the room. Their son leaned against Ethan, asking endless questions about the film. Their daughter rested her head on Lena's lap, her small fingers curling around her mother's hand. Ethan reached over, lacing his fingers through Lena's free one, giving it a gentle squeeze. At one point, the twins erupted into laughter over a silly scene, their joy infectious. Ethan leaned close to Lena's ear and whispered, "Listen to them. That's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." Lena's eyes softened as she watched their children giggling, their cheeks flushed with happiness. She turned to Ethan and whispered back, "This is what love sounds like." He kissed her temple, his lips lingering as though he wanted to memorize the moment. "And it's all because of you." Her chest tightened with emotion. She had once known silence filled with neglect. Now, her world overflowed with laughter and warmth. When the movie ended, the twins begged for just one more story before bed. Ethan carried their son on his shoulders while Lena held their daughter's hand. Together, they tucked the children in, listening to their last-minute chatter about the movie. "Mom, Dad," their daughter said drowsily, "I hope when I grow up, I find someone who loves me like you two love each other." Lena's eyes stung with tears. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "You will, sweetheart. And until then, you'll always have us." Ethan added softly, "And whoever he is, he'll have to pass through me first." His son giggled, already half asleep, while their daughter smiled and drifted into dreams. Back in the living room, Ethan pulled Lena into his arms. They stood in the quiet, wrapped in each other, the faint hum of the children's breathing still audible down the hall. "You know," Ethan said, brushing his thumb over her cheek, us. It's the only legacy I care about. The rest, the money, the empire, the name, it all means nothing compared to the sound of them laughing and the look on your face when you're happy." Lena leaned into him, her voice breaking softly. "I used to think love was something you had to beg for. Now I know it's something you build together." Friends, I want to pause here for just a moment. If you're still watching and enjoying this journey, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps keep our stories alive, and it means the world to me to know you're with us. That night, Lena lay curled against Ethan, their hands entwined as the glow from the fireplace flickered across the room. She closed her eyes, her heart full, her spirit at peace. This was love, not grand speeches or empty promises, but the quiet certainty of being chosen every single day. The house was silent now, the twins asleep, their toys tucked neatly away. Lena moved slowly through the halls, extinguishing the last of the lamps until only the warm glow of the fireplace remained. She found Ethan in his favorite chair, a book in his hands, though his eyes lifted the moment she entered the room. He set the book aside and rose, crossing to her with the kind of ease that spoke of years of love, not weeks. His hands found hers, his fingers threading naturally through her own. "You look tired," he said softly. "Sit with me." They curled together on the couch, Lena tucked against his chest. The firelight painted shadows across his face, but in his eyes there was only warmth. She let out a content sigh, her body sinking into the safety of his embrace. For a while, they said nothing. Words weren't needed. Their silence wasn't heavy. It was a sanctuary where love spoke without sound. Finally, Lena whispered, "Do you ever wonder what life might have been if we hadn't found each other?" Ethan kissed her hair gently. "I don't, because I can't imagine a world where you're not mine. The rest doesn't matter." Her heart stirred at the conviction in his tone. She lifted her head to meet his gaze, her eyes shimmering. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd deserve, Ethan. Sometimes it overwhelms me." He cupped her cheek with his hand, his thumb brushing softly across her skin. "You don't deserve this because of what you've been through, Lena. You deserve it because of who you are. You're strong. You're kind. You're the heart of this family. Loving you isn't a gift I'm giving. It's a gift I've been given." Her breath caught, tears gathering in her eyes. She pressed her lips to his, a kiss that carried gratitude and devotion. When they parted, she whispered, "You'll never know how much you've healed me." Ethan pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her fully. "And you'll never know how much you've completed me." Later, as the fire crackled low, they stretched out together on the rug. Ethan traced soft circles across her palm, his touch unhurried, reverent. Their voices lowered, confessions spilling in the safety of the night. "I used to think love had to hurt," Lena admitted, her voice fragile but steady. "That it was something you endured, not something you enjoyed. But with you, I learned love is gentle. It protects, it uplifts, it makes you whole." Ethan's lips brushed her temple. "And I promise, Lena, I will never let you forget that. Not for a single day of our lives." Her tears slipped silently, not from sadness, but from joy so deep it overwhelmed her. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The flames dwindled, the room falling into hushed stillness. Wrapped in his arms, Lena closed her eyes, her heart finally free of the weight it had once carried. She no longer wondered if she was loved. She no longer questioned her worth. She was safe. She was chosen. She was home. And as Ethan whispered a final, "I love you," into the quiet night, Lena knew with absolute certainty that this love, this life, was forever. The city's Arts Foundation hosted its annual dinner at the museum, drawing business leaders and patrons beneath vaulted ceilings and warm light. Damian Cross arrived late, greeted by a dozen eager handshakes and the familiar hum of admiration. He wore certainty like a second skin until he saw her, Lena. She stood near a modern sculpture, her hand linked with Ethan's. The years had not dulled her, they had refined her. Confidence rested easily on her shoulders. Her smile was calm, her eyes bright. Two children flanked them, sharing a joke that sent both into a fit of laughter. The boy's grin cut through Damien like a blade, straight, unmistakable, achingly familiar. The girl tilted her head with a thoughtful curiosity he'd once seen in a mirror. His glass stopped halfway to his lips. For a breath, the room narrowed to one small circle of light around them. The sound of donors, waiters, clinking plates, everything faded beneath the thud in his chest. He hadn't prepared for this. He'd prepared for deals, for applause, for control, not for a past that breathed, laughed, and looked back with his eyes. Lena noticed him last. It wasn't shock that crossed her face. It was composure. She held Ethan's gaze for a beat, then turned fully toward Damien. Her expression stayed steady, strong, untouched by the panic he expected. Ethan followed her line of sight and offered Damien a polite nod, the kind reserved for distant acquaintances. No challenge, no false warmth, just a boundary wrapped in courtesy. The twins glanced up, curious. The boy whispered something to his sister. She tugged lightly on Ethan's sleeve, and he bent to listen. Damien set his drink down on the nearest tray and forced his feet to move. He told himself he had to be dignified, careful, measured, yet every step felt like walking across a floor that might give way. "Lena?" His voice came out lower than he intended. "Mr. Cross," she answered, her tone even. "Good evening." Ethan extended a hand. "Ethan Carter." Damien took it. The shake was firm, solid, a man at ease with himself, a man who didn't need to posture to fill a room. The boy studied Damien with open curiosity. "Do we know you?" he asked. Not rude, just direct. Lena rested a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "This is Mr. Cross. We used to work in the same circles." The pause was delicate, but Damien heard everything it contained. He swallowed, the back of his throat dry. An event coordinator stepped to the microphone a few yards away, thanking benefactors and outlining the night's schedule. Applause scattered through the hall. In that moment's cover, Damien let his eyes travel, searching for proof he could deny. He didn't find any. The proof stood right in front of him with a lopsided grin and thoughtful eyes. "Congratulations," he said finally, because the truth burned and he had to say something that didn't. "You've built a beautiful family." Lena's answer was simple. "Thank you." She turned to Ethan, and the smallest smile touched her mouth. The kind reserved for a person who has never made you doubt your worth. The boy tugged at Ethan's hand. "Dad, can we see the light exhibit again?" "Of course," Ethan said, glancing to Lena. "Want to come?" "I'll join you in a minute," she replied. Ethan nodded and led the twins a few steps away toward the installation. The children moved in bursts of excitement, pointing and chattering, their joy easy and unafraid. Damien watched them go. Something old and heavy rose in his chest, regret wrapped in 1,000 what-ifs. He'd spent years outrunning silence. Here it was, catching him without effort. He turned back to Lena. "May I speak to you?" Somewhere quieter. She held his stare for a long beat. 2 minutes, she said at last. "By the side corridor. Then I'll rejoin my family." 2 minutes. He had postponed crucial negotiations for less. Yet suddenly it felt like all the time in the world, and nowhere near enough. They stepped into a hushed corridor lined with portraits. Soft footfalls and distant conversation drifted from the main hall. Lena stood with her back straight, hands clasped lightly in front of her. Damien was struck by the simplicity of her poise. No anger on display, no tremor. Only a steady calm that made his excuses feel flimsy. "I didn't know," he began, the words scraping his throat. "Not truly. I suspected the moment I saw them. But I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Lena corrected. Not cruel, just clear. "There's a difference." He closed his eyes for a second. Memory flared, papers, late nights, a voice in his ear urging him higher, faster, colder. He had convinced himself that love was a delay, that tenderness was a threat, that walking away was strategy. "What are their names?" he asked, because asking felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and still choosing to look down. Lena's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Noah and Maya." "Noah, Maya." The names landed on his chest with the weight of years. "How old?" 8. 8 years of birthdays. 8 years of first words, first steps, missing teeth, school recitals. 8 years that didn't wait for him while he built towers out of glass and pride. Damien's voice cracked. "They look They look like themselves, Lena said gently, though the firmness held. Whole, loved, secure. He swallowed. Do they know anything about me? They know their story, she answered. All of it isn't for tonight. A museum staffer passed at a distance, gave a respectful nod, and moved on. The pause gave Damien time to choose honesty over posture. I was wrong, he said, each word deliberate. I chose my name over yours. I chose applause over our vows. I don't expect you to care about my regrets, but I do regret them. Lena's chin lifted a fraction. Regret is a start. Responsibility is better. He let the sentence rest between them. What would responsibility look like now? Boundaries, she said. Decency. Respect for the life they have. And respect for the man who has been there every morning and every night. Damien followed her glance toward the exhibit where Ethan knelt beside the twins, explaining how light moved across the structure. The children hung on his words, trust woven through the simple scene. I can't undo anything, Damien said. But if there's a way to be present without tearing what's whole, Lena finished. That depends on your reasons. Is this about you or about them? He opened his mouth, closed it, then chose the truth that hurt. Both. Thank you for admitting it, she said. Honesty helps. But it doesn't heal everything. The hallway swelled with a wave of applause from the main room. The program must have shifted to the next presentation. Damien glanced toward the sound, then back at Lena, afraid the moment would end before he found the question that mattered. Do I have any place in their lives? He asked quietly. You had a place in mine, she answered, not unkindly. You stepped out of it. They have a father. He is not the man who walked away. A different approach would have argued, staked a claim, demanded proof. He didn't. He couldn't. The look in her eyes left no room for swagger. I would like to meet them, he said, careful, measured. Not to disrupt, to acknowledge. If you ever think it's right. Not tonight, Lena said. Tonight is for them. She checked the time, then added, I'm going back. Ethan worries when I'm gone too long. The name wasn't a jab, it was a fact. A small human fact that spoke of consistent care. Damien nodded. May I walk with you? He asked, though he already knew the answer. You may walk behind me, she said softly. We don't perform closeness. We don't have. Somewhere inside, the man he had been winced. The man he was now whispered, You earned that. They returned to the gallery. Noah and Maya spotted Lena first, racing to her side with grins that brightened everything around them. Ethan rose, read her face with a glance, and eased his hand to the small of her back. The gesture was simple, steady, certain. Damien stopped several steps away, the gap between them honest and deserved. He thought of the years he'd traded for rooms full of strangers praising his ambition. None of them looked back at him with anything like this. Two children laughing. A woman at peace, a home gathered in four bodies standing close. For the first time in his adult life, he felt something he couldn't negotiate. Loss. A curator announced the start of a private tour for major donors. Ethan had promised the twins a look at the new installation before the crowd. He checked with Lena, then spoke to the guide. Within minutes, the small group began moving through a series of rooms. Damien lingered near the back. He wasn't invited, but he wasn't removed either. The children pressed buttons that shifted colors across glass panes. Their delight was contagious. Lena watched them with a softness that used to be his map home. Ethan stood close, offering explanations in simple terms, patient with their questions. Maya pointed to a shimmering panel and called, Mom, look. Lena stepped beside her daughter, crouching to share the angle that made the light flare. Noah tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Why does it change like that? Because some things reveal more beauty when you move, Ethan said, ruffling his hair. Stand here. Now 2 steps left. See? Noah's eyes widened. Whoa, it's better here. Sometimes, Ethan added with a smile, a small step changes everything. Damien felt the sentence land like a verdict and a blessing. A small step, years too late. At the final room, the guide thanked the group and released them back to the main hall. A quartet began to play near the stage. Servers wove through the crowd with trays. Ethan shifted closer to Lena. Do you want to step outside for a breath? He asked. In a moment, she said, glancing toward Damien. I should close this with clarity. Ethan read the decision in her voice and nodded. "I'll take the kids to see the fountain," he told her. He turned to Damien with calm civility. "We'll be right over there. No arrogance, no performance, just a clear line drawn with kindness." Lena waited until the twins skipped ahead with Ethan. Then she faced Damien, not cornered, not defensive, simply resolved. "You asked about responsibility," she said. "For me, it starts with truth. You walked away. I carried a child to term alone. I held a newborn with no one to call. I learned to sleep without fear and build a life without you. Ethan did not replace you. He showed up when there was no you to replace." Damien's eyes burned. "I know. I am not angry like I once was," she continued, her voice steady. "I am careful. Their security is not up for debate. If you enter their lives, you do it without chaos, without grand gestures, without trying to rewrite history." "I won't ask for more than you can give," he said. "You won't ask," she corrected. "You will be invited, or you will not be there." A flush rose at his collar. He nodded. "Understood." Her gaze softened a degree. "For what it's worth, I don't wish you harm," she said. "I wish you wisdom." He almost laughed, short, bitter, small. Wisdom had been free the whole time. He had chosen applause. A pause settled. The quartet reached a tender melody. Across the hall, Ethan hoisted Noah for a better look at the fountain's centerpiece, while Maya described, to anyone who would listen, how the water looked like glass. "Can I ask one thing?" Damien said quietly. "Not a demand, a request." "You can ask. If they ever ask about me," he said, voice unsteady, "please tell them I am sorry." "I already planned to," Lena replied. "They deserve the whole story, including your regret. But they deserve peace more." He nodded, swallowing a rush of words that would only break what her grace had held together. "Will you forgive me?" The question slipped out. "I did," she said. "Not for you, for me. Forgiveness freed my heart. It didn't restore our bond." He closed his eyes, letting that truth settle like a final brick in a wall he'd built with his own hands. Lena glanced to the fountain, where Ethan now had both kids laughing over a silly magic trick with coins. "I'm going to them," she said. "Good night, Mr. Cross." "Good night, Lena." She walked away, not hurried, not dramatic, just sure. Damien stayed where he was, letting the noise rush back in. A colleague clapped him on the shoulder, launching into talk of a merger. Damien nodded in the correct places, answered with half words, and realized he had never felt more alone in a full room. The event wound toward its final speeches. Guests clustered near the stage. Ethan, Lena, and the twins stood slightly apart, giving the children a view without the crush of bodies. Damien hovered at a respectful distance, debating whether to leave. He'd said enough. He'd heard enough. Yet one more truth pressed against his ribs. He stepped closer, careful to stay outside their circle. "Ethan," he said. Ethan turned, protective instinct visible but calm. "Yes?" "Thank you," Damien managed, "for treating them with care, for everything." Ethan studied him, then offered a small nod. "Children are not consolation prizes," he said. "They're the point." Damien absorbed that. "You're a better man than I was." "I'm just a man who chose to stay," Ethan answered. He glanced at Lena, a question in his eyes. She gave a slight nod, permission to finish what needed saying. Damien looked at Lena. "If there's ever a way to make amends, I'm available, not to undo, to serve what's best for them." "We'll decide what's best," Lena replied, neither harsh nor placating. "If a door opens, you'll hear from me." Maya tugged Lena's hand. "Mom, are we going soon?" "Soon, love," Lena said, smoothing her daughter's hair. A speaker at the podium thanked the donors again and invited a final round of support. Applause swelled. In that cover of sound, Damien's composure thinned. He took a breath that felt like jumping into cold water. "I was cruel," he said, voice low. "Not just careless, cruel. I told myself it was necessary. It wasn't. I traded a family for a story about myself that wasn't true." He looked at the twins, then back to Lena. "I'm sorry." Lena's eyes shone, not with old hurt, those tears had been spent long ago, but with compassion edged by certainty. "I hear you," she said. "Tonight, that is enough." The applause faded. The quartet picked up a soft close. Guests began to collect their coats. Ethan bent to whisper to the twins. They brightened at the promise of late-night hot chocolate. Damien took a step back. The moment was ending, and with it, his hope that words could somehow rearrange the past. He could accept that. He had to. Before he turned away, Lena addressed the camera in her mind, the unseen friend she always imagined on the other side of Mr. Ross' story trail, the person who might need strength right now. Her voice stayed gentle, but the question held weight. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Forgive or walk away? Drop your answer in the comments below. No theatrics. Just a hand extended to those listening, inviting them to think about love, self-worth, and where the line must be drawn. Noah tugged Ethan's sleeve. Dad, can we get 2 marshmallows each? 2. Ethan teased. That sounds like a bold negotiation. 3. Maya bargained, eyes bright. Lena laughed softly. We'll see. They moved toward the exit as a family, unhurried, together. Ethan reached for Lena's hand. She took it without looking, the muscle memory of trust. The twins skipped ahead, debating toppings as if the world hinged on cocoa recipes. Damien stood still, letting the scene etch itself into him. He could walk out and return to the life he had mastered, the one where success answered every stinging doubt. Or he could choose a different road, quiet, humble, slow, a road that might never win him headlines but might teach him how to be human again. He exhaled, long and unguarded. The night pressed on. He turned toward the doors, not following them, not crossing their path, just stepping into whatever came next with the first honest step he'd taken in years. The car ride home from the museum was quiet, but not heavy. Noah and Maya leaned against each other in the back seat, already drifting towards sleep after their hot chocolate adventure. Ethan's steady hands guided the car through the city streets, while Lena gazed out. The window, the glow of streetlights painting fleeting patterns across her face. Her thoughts weren't muddled with confusion. They were sharp, steady, anchored. The encounter with Damien had stirred old wounds, yes, but it had also clarified the life she now held. When they reached home, Ethan carried Noah upstairs while Lena guided Maya to her room. She tucked the little girl in, brushing her hair gently off her forehead. Maya's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Mom," she murmured sleepily, "that man we met tonight." He looked sad. Lena's chest tightened. "Yes, love. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt others and themselves, and sadness follows them until they decide to change." "Will he change?" Maya asked, her voice heavy with sleep. "I don't know," Lena whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's brow. "But I do know this. You and your brother will never have to wonder if you're loved, because you are, always." Down the hall, Ethan laid Noah into bed, ruffling his hair before pulling the blanket up. Noah cracked one eye open. "Dad, are you staying?" Ethan smiled. "Where else would I be?" The boy nodded, satisfied, and slipped back into dreams. Later, Lena found Ethan on the balcony, the night cool and still around them. He turned as she joined him, his expression calm but curious. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "More than all right. Tonight reminded me of something important. I don't have to question anymore. My choice was made the moment I chose peace over pride, love over ambition, us over emptiness." Ethan brushed his hand against hers, fingers intertwining. "And I'll never stop choosing you." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, the city quiet beneath them. The choice was clear. She had walked away from shadows into light, and she would never return. The next morning, Noah and Maya bounded into the kitchen, curiosity lighting their faces. "Mom," Noah said, climbing onto a stool, "who was that man really? He looked like us." Lena's heart caught for a moment, but she steadied herself. Ethan gave her a small nod, a silent reminder. Honesty matters, but so does safety. She set a plate of breakfast before them and sat down. "That man was someone I once knew very well. A long time ago, I believed he would stand by me, but he chose another path. It hurt me, and it left me alone when I needed him most." Maya tilted her head. "So, he was supposed to be our dad?" Lena reached across the table, taking both their small hands in hers. "He's part of where you came from. But being a parent is more than that. A parent is the one who shows up, who protects you, who chooses you every day. And that's what your father, your real father, Ethan, has done since the beginning." Noah's eyes flicked toward Ethan. "But he didn't walk away. He stayed." "That's right," Ethan said gently, leaning closer. "Because love isn't proven by words. It's proven by staying, even when it's hard. The twins absorbed this, their young minds turning it over. Finally, Maya whispered, "So, people can make mistakes. But it doesn't mean we're not worth loving, right?" "Exactly," Lena said, squeezing their hands. "Your worth has never been in question." "Not once." Noah frowned thoughtfully. "But what about him? Will he always be sad?" Lena glanced at Ethan, then back at her son. "That's up to him. Sometimes people don't realize what they had until it's gone. Sadness can last a long time when greed and pride take the place of love. But what matters for us is that we choose differently. We choose love. We choose respect. We choose each other." The twins nodded slowly, understanding more than their years suggested. And in that morning light, Lena felt grateful. Not only that they had a father who cherished them, but that they were already learning lessons she hadn't known until adulthood. Damien sat alone in his penthouse that night, the skyline stretching wide but hollow. The city he had once conquered with his ambition now felt indifferent, its towers silent witnesses to his solitude. He poured a drink but left it untouched, staring instead at the reflection of his own face in the glass. Noah's grin, Maya's eyes, Lena's steady calm. They lingered no matter how many times he blinked them away. The silence pressed against him, a sharp contrast to the warmth he had witnessed hours before. Ethan's hand at the small of Lena's back, the twins laughing over Coco, the quiet assurance of a family bound by loyalty. For the first time, Damien understood that success without love was not triumph. It was exile. He had built a kingdom of glass, and now he stood in it alone. His phone buzzed with a message, another deal, another opportunity, another chance to climb higher. He silenced it. The numbers didn't matter anymore. They never had. Not compared to what he had lost. Regret filled him, thick and choking. But regret did not bring back years. It did not tuck children into bed or mend vows broken beyond recognition. It only echoed in empty rooms and reminded him that choices had consequences. Damien Cross, once celebrated for his empire, now faced the truth. He had conquered the world but forfeited his home. Weeks later, Lena walked hand in hand with Ethan while the twins skipped ahead on the path through the park. The autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, the air crisp and full of change. Noah ran back to her side, clutching a handful of leaves. "Mom, can we press these in a book?" "Of course," she said, smoothing his hair. "We'll keep them, so you'll always remember this day." As they continued walking, Ethan turned to her. "Do you ever wonder what you'd say if you could give your younger self advice?" Lena smiled softly. "Yes, I'd tell her, love must be rooted in loyalty and respect. Anything else is hollow. I'd tell her that greed destroys, but forgiveness frees the heart. And most of all, I'd tell her that self-worth is never negotiable." Ethan kissed her temple. "That's a lesson worth teaching the world." They stopped to watch the twins chase one another, their laughter filling the park. Lena's heart swelled, full and certain. She had not only survived, she had built something unshakable. Friends, thank you for staying with me through this journey. Stories like this remind us of truths we sometimes forget, that love without loyalty is empty, that respect is the foundation of any lasting bond, and that forgiveness heals, but self-worth must never be surrendered. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mr. Ross Story Trail. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it means the world to know we're walking this path together.